Belbek was once a place where Russia had reason to believe it remained beyond real reach. It was not just a military base in Crimea. It was a space protected by radar, air defense systems, electronic warfare, and a layered shield designed to stop the most dangerous strikes. But in a short span of time, that sense of security appeared to collapse. What happened at Belbek no longer looked like a routine strike, nor simply another flashpoint in this war. If such a dense defensive network could still be penetrated in this way, then what truly happened before the attack even began? Did it start from something much smaller, a single movement seen from above? And if that is the case, then Belbek may not have been the beginning, but the final point where a chain of detection, tracking, and strikes came together. Stay with Military Force to find out. Near Pokrovsk, Russian troops have often tried to lower their losses by moving in smaller groups instead of pushing forward in one large formation. Some move on foot. Others rely on light vehicles such as ATVs, motorcycles, and trucks to cross exposed roads and rough tracks as fast as possible. At first glance, that method looks practical. A dispersed force is less likely to be wiped out by one artillery strike. Smaller groups can appear harder to detect from the ground. But under heavy Ukrainian drone patrols, that same method creates a different weakness. It produces many separate points of movement across fields, dirt roads, and broken terrain. Each one can stand out clearly from above. A single rider on a motorcycle can become visible. A truck entering a muddy path can be tracked. Two soldiers running across open ground can be identified within seconds. These movements may seem minor on the map. In the drone view, they become clear signals. Even before any strike begins, the pattern of motion can reveal route, spacing, and vulnerability. It can also show whether the unit is exposed, delayed, or drifting away from support. That is why the battle around Pokrovsk now begins earlier than many old battlefield assumptions would suggest. It begins the moment movement is detected and judged from the air. Ukrainian drones often do not strike at the first second of contact. Operators may follow a target briefly to confirm direction, isolation, and the best moment to attack. This short tracking phase is important. It turns a simple sighting into a controlled hunting process. Crews can judge whether a soldier is alone. They can see whether another vehicle is nearby. They can evaluate whether the terrain ahead will slow escape. In many recorded cases, the people on the ground keep moving as if nothing has changed. This suggests they do not realize they are already under watch. This is the deeper change on the Pokrovsk front. Combat no longer starts only when shots are fired. It starts the moment a moving target appears on a screen. It continues as that target is quietly held inside a chain of detection and selection. Speed alone is no longer enough to protect a unit. Scattered movement no longer guarantees lower visibility. What once looked like flexible maneuver can now create a series of isolated signatures. Each one is easier to follow than commanders may expect. This gives the side with aerial vision more time to decide when pressure should begin. But being seen is only the beginning. What follows after detection is even more revealing. Familiar survival instincts, such as running toward nearby cover, are becoming less effective under an enemy watching from directly above. The moment a drone is heard above the battlefield, the reaction on the ground is usually immediate. Soldiers run toward the nearest object that seems solid enough to protect them. That object may be a wrecked vehicle, a tree, the edge of a tree line, or part of a ruined wall. In older forms of combat, that instinct often worked well enough to buy a few seconds of survival. A piece of cover could break line of sight, reduce exposure to rifle fire, and give a man time to think or move again. But under constant aerial surveillance, that old habit is becoming less reliable. What blocks danger from the front does not automatically block danger from above. The soldier believes he is moving towards safety. The drone operator often sees a target moving into a trap that only looks like safety from ground level. This shift is not only about better visibility, it is about a new viewing angle that changes the meaning of cover itself. A damaged car may hide a body from another soldier across the road, but it does not fully hide that same body from a camera looking down. A tree trunk may shield one side of the torso, yet the movement around that trunk can still be tracked from above. Even a bush or a shallow ditch may only delay detection rather than stop it. The men on the ground are often using survival habits shaped by a battlefield where danger came from the side. The drone changes the geometry of risk. Instead of escaping contact, the target often remains inside the same frame while trying to move from one weak shelter to another. Each new movement can reveal speed, direction, fatigue, and the limits of nearby protection. That pressure matters too because fear can force rushed choices that expose a soldier more clearly than calm movement would. That helps explain why a drone strike so often does not end with the first hit. The first attack may not need to kill immediately. It may only need to wound, shock, pin down, or strip away the target's ability to move freely. Once that happens, the balance changes sharply. A second drone can approach a man whose choices are already reduced. He may be injured. He may be trapped near poor cover. He may be too exhausted to run again. This is where the kill chain becomes more serious than a single strike clip might suggest. Detection leads to pressure. Pressure leads to damage or immobilization. Then a follow-up strike closes the sequence. Being seen is no longer just a warning that danger may come soon. It is often the beginning of a narrowing corridor in which every reaction creates less safety than the one before it. This is especially dangerous for dispersed infantry moving without strong nearby support. Once soldiers are separated from armored protection, electronic cover, or fast coordination, each man is left with whatever shelter exists within a few meters. If that shelter cannot break observation, then time begins to work against him. Every extra second under watch raises the chance that another drone, another munition, or another approach will follow. Survival is no longer measured only by whether something can stop a bullet. It is measured by whether anything can truly break contact with an eye in the sky. A soldier can still react fast. He can still find an object to hide behind. But if the drone keeps sight of him from above, those moves may only delay the result instead of changing it. If even simple cover in open terrain is no longer enough, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Can ruined urban space still offer the kind of hiding advantage it once did? That is why the story at Chasiv Yar becomes so important next. At Chasiv Yar, the ruins no longer guarantee safety, because drones can now detect even a single soldier hiding inside what once looked like protective urban wreckage. In older city battles, broken buildings often reduced danger. A collapsed room, a roofless house, or a narrow angle behind cracked concrete could interrupt sightlines and make direct fire less effective. That assumption is weakening. In this battle, the damaged environment still blocks some ground observation, but it does not stop surveillance from above for long. The battles show the destruction, which no longer removes visibility. Instead, it creates a short delay before aerial reconnaissance rebuilds the scene and identifies where people are alive and moving. That is why Chasiv Yar matters beyond one street or one ruined position. It shows how urban cover is being redefined under constant drone pressure. The most important detail in the transcript is that the drone did not simply find one group and call in one strike. It appears to have separated the battlefield into individual hiding points and then exposed them one by one. That suggests a patient method. A reconnaissance drone first notices movement, shape, or behavior that does not match the surrounding rubble. It then keeps watching until one shelter can be distinguished from another. A broken wall becomes a reference point. A damaged room becomes a target box. A gap between debris becomes a route of escape that can also be monitored. Once that picture is built, strike drones do not need to attack blindly. They can be directed toward each point in sequence. This turns the ruins into a mapped hunting space, where survival depends on whether cover can still prevent recognition from above. That is why the destroyed city no longer works as a naturally protective maze in the way many armies once imagined. The rubble still slows movement and breaks unit cohesion. It still creates obstacles for vehicles and makes infantry movement exhausting, but it does not automatically shield the person inside it. In many cases, a ruined structure now offers only temporary delay rather than real concealment. A soldier may still be protected from a rifleman, a machine gun, or even an armored vehicle looking through a narrow ground angle. Yet the real threat comes from overhead observation that studies the area for longer and with more patience. Once one fighter is found, nearby corners, half-collapsed walls, and dark openings also come under suspicion. What once served as cover for hours may now serve as cover for minutes. In some cases, it may only buy seconds before a precise strike follows. This points to a broader change in urban warfare. A ruined district is no longer just a place for close combat between assault groups moving from room to room. It is becoming a searchable combat grid shaped by drones, timing, and repeated confirmation from above. That changes the meaning of survival. Staying alive in a city like Chasiv Yar depends less on simply reaching a broken structure and more on movement discipline, camouflage, silence, and the ability to avoid patterns that drones can track. The wall still exists, the basement still exists, the shattered doorway still exists, but none of them means what it meant before. Urban destruction now delays death rather than reliably preventing it. However, buildings and physical cover are not the only factors that shape survival. In many situations, the ground, the weather, and the condition of the terrain are what keep a target exposed long enough to make the next strike more certain. Rain-soaked mud can change the outcome of a fight before a weapon even strikes, because once Russian vehicles lose speed on damaged dirt routes, they stop acting like moving platforms and start behaving like visible targets. That shift matters because trucks, ATVs, and other light vehicles depend on momentum to survive across open ground. In dry conditions, even a risky movement can still succeed if the driver keeps speed and clears the danger area. After rain, that margin becomes much smaller. Wheels slip, engines strain, and vehicles can drift off the narrow path into softer ground. The result is not only slower movement, it is longer exposure. That extra time gives Ukrainian drones a wider window to observe, confirm, and position for attack. What looks like a small loss of traction can become a much larger combat problem within seconds. Russian military vehicle became stuck in mud, and the soldiers on board had to jump down and scatter while a drone was already closing in. That moment is important because it shows how quickly organized movement can collapse into confusion. A vehicle in motion still gives troops some protection. It can carry them through exposed ground, reduce the time spent under observation, and offer some chance to escape a bad angle of attack. Once it is trapped, that protection disappears almost immediately. The men on board are forced into the open at exactly the wrong moment. They are no longer moving fast enough to outrun the threat, but they have not yet reached cover. That short transition from mobility to disorder is where drone warfare becomes especially deadly. Instead of one target, the drone operator suddenly sees a stranded vehicle, dismounting troops, and confused movement that is easier to read from above than a clean crossing. The battlefield turns from a transport route into a trap. This is why mud after rain is no longer just a background detail of the weather. It has become a direct amplifier of the drone kill chain. A vehicle that still holds speed may keep some chance of escaping the best strike line, because movement forces the operator to calculate timing, angle, and final approach under pressure. But once mud holds the vehicle in place, even partly, the target begins to behave like a semi-static object. If it sinks deeper or loses control entirely, it becomes almost fully static. That makes identification easier, approach safer, and impact more certain. In practical terms, weather and terrain are now helping shape battlefield lethality. They do not replace weapons, but they increase their effectiveness by trapping, slowing, and exposing the target long enough for a precise strike. That is the deeper lesson from this part of the story. The ground itself is taking part in the engagement. It is no longer only the drone, the soldier, or the vehicle that decides the outcome. Mud can now hold a target in place long enough to turn movement into vulnerability and delay into destruction. But the impact of drones does not stop with infantry or light vehicles. When the same logic of detection, tracking, and repeated strikes is applied to a mobile air defense system, the meaning of the story becomes far larger than an ordinary battlefield clash. The strike on a moving S-300V suggests that high-value military systems are no longer protected simply because they are important, costly, or in motion, because persistent drone surveillance is making exposure dangerous for almost everything on the battlefield. That is what gives this episode its wider meaning. An S-300V is not a minor tactical object. It is a major air defense asset linked to the protection of airspace, support areas, and forces behind the front. A system like this helps defend formations and makes enemy air activity more difficult. For that reason, its survival matters at more than a local level. When such a system is detected from above while moving along a rural road, the incident becomes more than one successful strike. It becomes evidence that even assets built to shield others are now vulnerable during movement. The sequence described in the transcript makes that danger even clearer. The first drone strike appears to have done more than damage the target. It seems to have taken away the system's ability to keep moving. That detail is critical because mobility was the one protection the crew still had once it had been detected. As soon as that advantage was lost, the S-300V stopped being a moving threat and became a fixed opportunity. The second drone then struck the same location, ensuring that the system could not leave the area. This follow-up matters because it shows a complete attack logic. The goal was not just to score one hit. The goal was to trap the target in place and finish the job before any escape was possible. That makes the story much larger than a single battlefield success. It shows that drone operators are not only finding expensive systems, they are applying repeated pressure until those systems lose their last chance to survive. This points to a deeper change in how survival works for valuable military equipment. For a long time, movement was seen as one of the best defenses available to a system like the S-300V. A vehicle that kept changing location was harder to target, harder to predict, and less likely to remain exposed long enough for an attack to land. That assumption is now under pressure. In a battlefield watched from above, movement can become the very moment when a target is easiest to identify. A system on the road reveals shape, route, direction, and speed. Those signs make tracking easier once surveillance is constant enough. That is why this story no longer stays at the level of soldiers or light vehicles being hunted across open ground. It expands to the threat against operationally important systems that once seemed more secure. If even a moving S-300V can be found, disabled, and struck again before it escapes, then the battlefield is shifting against any valuable target that becomes visible. Once both small targets and high-value assets can be pulled into the same cycle of detection and repeated strikes, the real issue is no longer separate hits. Continuous drone patrols are turning the ground war into a space of near-permanent exposure, because almost any movement on the battlefield can now become the start of a strike sequence. That is the central change in this section. A soldier moving between positions, a team carrying supplies, a vehicle trying to reach the line, or troops searching for a safer hiding place can all create signals that are visible from above. Once that happens, the danger does not begin at that moment. It is already waiting overhead. This is why the threat no longer appears only in short waves. In areas where UAVs can hold observation for long periods, the pressure becomes almost constant. That changes both the tactical and psychological reality of combat. Units are not simply trying to avoid one shelling phase or one sudden attack. They are trying to function while being watched for long stretches of time. The result is that even routine actions become dangerous. Walking, resupplying, repositioning, or pausing too long in one place can all invite attention, When surveillance is this persistent, exposure is no longer a rare mistake. It becomes a condition of the battlefield itself. That is why units without short-range air defense, electronic jamming, or coordinated support are pushed into a severe disadvantage. If they cannot interfere with drones above them, then even a few seconds of visibility may be enough for detection, confirmation, and strike. Under those conditions, hiding remains possible, but only for a limited time. A trench, a ruined building, a tree line, or a roadside depression may delay an attack briefly, yet none of them guarantees lasting safety if observation continues. Without layered protection, infantry and ground vehicles are often left to absorb this pressure on their own. That weakens more than physical survival. It also damages tempo, confidence, and freedom of action. Movements must slow down. Routes become narrower. Choices become fewer. Drone patrols therefore do more than destroy individual targets. They are shaping the pace, the space, and the rules of survival across the wider battle. They influence which roads still seem usable, which positions remain temporary, and which actions become too dangerous to attempt. And when all these pieces are placed together, what appears is not merely a collection of successful strikes. What happened across Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, the rain-soaked mud routes, and the strike on the moving S-300V points to something larger than a series of successful attacks. It points to a new combat logic. A small movement can now trigger a chain of tracking and pursuit, while a hiding place or costly military system is no longer safe simply because it has cover or mobility. Once drones can detect, follow, disable, and strike again in quick succession, the battle begins to favor the side that sees first and keeps the target exposed longer. That shift carries a clear warning. Forces that lack EW, SHORAD, and strong coordination are likely to face growing pressure, while infantry and vehicles will be forced to change how they move, stop, and hide. What remains after these strikes is not only damage on the ground, but proof that modern war rewards faster targeting cycles. If this report helped you understand how modern war is changing, consider subscribing to stay informed with clear, fact-based analysis. Learning how conflicts evolve is not about supporting war, but about recognizing its real cost and why preventing it matters. Stay with Military Force to better understand today's battlefield and why knowledge remains one of the strongest tools for peace.